Lawyers. When did someone try to outsmart the system and karma took over mid-trial? The first time I met Leah Morton, she walked into my office in a tailored navy pantsuit and a calm, unnerving smile. The kind that makes you feel like she already knows how the conversation will end. She handed me a thin folder and said, "My husband is trying to ruin me. I need to make sure he doesn't get a penny." I glanced at the file. Her husband, Jared Morton, was a high-level financial advisor for a Fortune 500 firm. Leah? Stay-at-home mother for 11 years, but with a law degree she'd never used. 3 kids, big house in the suburbs, standard high-asset divorce. Except there was nothing standard about it. She'd already filed, but not in our county, in the neighboring, known for being slightly more lenient toward custodial parents. She timed the filing for when Jared was on a business trip to Tokyo. She'd frozen their joint accounts 36 hours before serving him papers. She even moved the kids to her sister's house, for stability, and filed an emergency order for exclusive use of the marital home. Most clients are overwhelmed during initial consults. Leah? She was 3 steps ahead. But here's the thing. That's not necessarily bad. Some clients are smart, strategic. You want that. It just usually means there's more to the story. And Leah's story was missing a few beats. Jared hired his own attorney, an older man named Frank Langley. Been around the block for 40 years, gray suit, slow talker, but sharp. I'd faced him before. He was patient, methodical, the kind of guy who will lull you into a false sense of control, then drop a court order like a guillotine. Right off the bat, Leah was adamant. Full custody, no alimony, house stays with her, and Jared should pay child support and cover the mortgage, since he's the one who cheated. He admitted it? I asked. She paused. Not in writing, but I know he did. Any proof? Another pause, then a tight smile. I'll have something soon. That should have been a red flag. But I was knee-deep in 6 other cases, and honestly, she presented well. Composed, confident, organized. Judges love that. It wasn't until our first hearing that I felt something off. Frank didn't come at us with the usual temporary motion responses. No, he brought a counterclaim. Jared wasn't just contesting custody. He was accusing Leah of parental alienation. Claimed she'd manipulated the kids, blocked his contact, and fabricated abuse. That kind of accusation is serious. Courts take alienation claims more seriously than most people realize. I looked at Leah during the break. She didn't flinch. Just said, of course he's going to lie. He's desperate. But the more I dug, the stranger it got. Her oldest daughter, Ava, refused to speak to Jared. Said he made her feel gross. The middle son had written a letter, claiming his dad yelled at night and made mom cry. But no dates, no incidents, no context. Just feelings, emotional breadcrumbs. And Leah? She never lost her cool, never cried, never even raised her voice. By the time discovery rolled around, Jared's side produced dozens of text messages Leah had sent to him, many of which contradicted her own timeline. She claimed he hadn't seen the kids in 6 weeks. He had a photo of them at an ice cream shop from 2 Fridays prior. She claimed he emptied their 529 college funds. He showed statements indicating she had authorized the withdrawals a year ago. For renovations, I confronted her gently. She leaned forward and said, I told you, I'm not playing nice. Jared is dangerous. I need you to trust me. And for a while I did, until we hit the deposition. That was the moment everything cracked. Frank called Leah's sister Amanda to testify. Amanda had been living with Leah and the kids on and off. But instead of backing her up, she hesitated. She said, what about Jared? Frank asked. Amanda shifted in her seat. She said a lot of things. I don't know what's true anymore. I thought I did. But, she made Ava repeat things, like rehearse them, over and over, before they saw the counselor. Dead silence. Leah's jaw didn't move, but her fingers curled slowly around her pen. I turned and looked at her. No denial, no panic, just that same small, calm smile. Outside the courtroom, I asked her flat out, did you coach your kids? She didn't answer, just asked me, if I did, would you still defend me? That was part 1 of the moment I knew karma was coming. But the rest? Oh, it came fast. And it came in the middle of trial. I wanted to believe Amanda had misunderstood. That maybe rehearsing meant helping the kids feel comfortable, not scripting their emotions. But my gut told me otherwise. And I knew the judge's gut would too. At our next prep session, I pressed Leah again. Leah, I said carefully, the judge is going to take Amanda's statement seriously. If there's any truth to it, even a sliver, we need to address it now. She didn't blink, just crossed her legs and calmly said, you told me this court is about perception. Well, I'm controlling the perception. I stared at her. I didn't force my kids to say anything, but I helped them organize their memories. That's when the realization hit me. Leah wasn't just trying to win. She was building a narrative from the ground up and using real people as her cast. By then, Jared's team had requested an emergency custody evaluation. The judge approved it. The appointed evaluator, a woman named Dr. Cardenas, had a reputation for being fair but brutal in her reports. During the evaluation, Ava refused to make eye contact with Dr. Cardenas. The middle son kept parroting lines Leah had said during our meetings. He manipulated Mom. He lied about his money. He's a narcissist. Big words for an 8-year-old. And the youngest, 6-year-old Max just cried every time someone said, Daddy. Dr. Cardenas requested sessions with both parents. Jared agreed immediately. Leah tried to reschedule. Twice. Said her schedule was full. Then tried to demand the sessions be held at her home for the children's emotional security. Dr. Cardenas refused. And then something shifted. 3 days before trial, I got an email from Frank Lang. Please be advised that we will be entering sealed audio files into evidence. That's a chilling email to get as a lawyer. It means your case is about to turn hard. I didn't tell Leah right away. I filed a motion to review the evidence first. We got into chambers. The judge played the first clip on her laptop, audio only. It was Ava's voice. Shaky, frightened. Mom says I have to tell them you touched me. But you didn't. I don't want to say that. Frank handed the judge a notarized affidavit. Apparently, Jared had installed a recording system in his home office months earlier after Leah accused him of erasing her digital files. He'd forgotten to disable it, and it captured Leah talking to Ava. Quiet, calm, measured, but unmistakably manipulative. You have to be strong, Leah's voice said in the recording. They won't believe you if you hesitate. Just remember, Daddy made you feel unsafe. It wasn't rage. It wasn't screaming. It was methodical. The judge looked at me. Her eyes were stone. We'll reconvene on this at trial, she said. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after court. Didn't even start the engine. Just stared ahead. My stomach twisted into something tight and sour. What the hell had I been defending? The next morning, I called Leah in. I needed to look her in the eye. She arrived 10 minutes late, unbothered. Sat across from me in a crisp white blouse like she hadn't just been caught engineering an emotional car crash. Leah, I said, they have audio of Avenue saying you told her to lie. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. That's illegal. He can't record her without consent. That's not the point. The judge heard it. We are in real trouble. And then, she smiled. Like this was still just a chess game. I want full custody, she said. Leah, you might lose custody. You could be looking at supervised visitation. No, she replied. You're not listening. That recording will never make it in. I know a guy at Child Services. He can make it disappear. That's when I snapped. I stood. You're not using me to run some kind of vengeance campaign. I am not a fixer. I'm your lawyer. And this is not winnable if you keep lying to everyone in the room. Her voice dropped low. You've benefited from my lies. Don't act righteous now. It took everything in me not to walk out. But then, karma walked in. Frank filed a motion the next day, requesting a forensic review of Leah's devices. Apparently, there were metadata discrepancies on some emails she submitted as evidence. Timestamps that didn't match. PDFs altered. The judge approved it. And that was when the system, the one she thought she could bend, started to bite back. When Leah found out her devices were being reviewed, she didn't flinch. She called me and said, "They won't find anything. I've been careful." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was still reeling from the audio, from the way she dismissed it, from the sheer confidence she carried like armor. But this was no longer a domestic dispute. It was becoming criminal. The forensic review took only 5 days. When the results came in, Frank filed them in a sealed envelope. I got a courtesy copy. I opened it in my office with shaking hands. The first line, several of the emails submitted by Ms. Morton as part of her declaration were altered using third-party metadata editing tools. The report outlined how Leah had downloaded a metadata scrubber 6 months ago. She'd edited timestamps on dozens of files, some to make Jared look like he was ignoring emails, others to suggest he sent threatening messages. Which, of course, he hadn't. The originals were recoverable. She hadn't just tried to manipulate testimony. She forged digital evidence. I brought her in one last time, not to strategize, to warn her. Leah, this is going to blow up in your face. If you don't come clean, you may not just lose custody, You could be charged with perjury, obstruction, possibly worse. She crossed her arms. Then fix it. I can't fix it. We're past that. She leaned forward, voice cold. Then find someone who can. That was the moment I realized I was done. I sent her a disengagement letter that evening and filed my motion to withdraw as counsel the next morning. The judge granted it. And I watched Leah walk into court alone for the first time. No legal pad. No binder. Just herself in a black dress. Heels clicking on the tile like she still had control. Frank, to his credit, didn't gloat. But he came with receipts. During the next hearing, he laid out the full chain of manipulation. The coached statements, the forged emails, the fake anonymous tip to Child Protective Services that was actually traced back to Leah's own Wi-Fi IP. Then came the moment that broke the courtroom. Dr. Cardenas returned to the stand and read aloud her summary. In my professional opinion, she said, Ms. Morton engaged in systematic emotional manipulation of her children. She demonstrated signs consistent with Munchausen by proxy through custody. That is, using the appearance of victimhood to assert control and induce sympathy, particularly from legal institutions. Gasps. Quiet murmurs. Even the judge seemed shaken. But the worst wasn't even her testimony. The worst was Ava, Leah's oldest daughter, who had been appointed a guardian ad litem. The gal asked the court to let Ava speak directly, just for 5 minutes. Permission was granted. Ava stood. 12 years old. Ponytail. Pale pink sweater. I don't want to go back with my mom, she said, voice trembling. She told me stories about my dad that weren't true. I tried to believe her. I did. But I remember what she said before court. She said I had to cry. She said judges only believe crying girls. Silence. Pure silence. She made me feel like I had to choose her, or I'd lose her. That broke people. Even Jared, sitting 3 rows behind, put his face in his hands. Leah? She didn't move. Just stared straight ahead. Not a flicker. But her house of cards was burning, and she still thought she could stand in the ashes and deny the fire. Then came the judge's final comment before recess. This case has moved beyond the boundaries of a divorce. We are now discussing custodial fraud and manipulation of the court. I will be reviewing potential referrals to the district attorney. And just like that, karma caught up. And it wasn't done yet. Leah walked into court the next day without an attorney. She'd tried to delay, filed a motion to push the hearing due to representation issues, but the judge denied it. Everyone saw through the stalling. This was no longer about divorce or custody or even the truth. This was about damage control, and Leah was running out of space to spin her story. The courtroom was tense. Frank brought in a new expert, a digital forensics consultant, to testify on the email alterations. He presented side-by-side comparisons, Leah's submitted evidence, and the original email server data Jared's team had subpoenaed. The time discrepancies were glaring. On one, Leah had backdated an email to make it seem Jared ignored a medical emergency with their son. But the server logs showed she sent it 2 weeks after the incident and then edited the timestamp to frame it as negligence. The expert ended with a simple sentence that rang louder than any accusation. These emails were intentionally falsified. The judge asked Leah directly if she'd like to respond. For the first time since the case began, Leah didn't speak. She just stared forward. Her jaw clenched so tightly, you could see the muscle twitch in her cheek. Ava sat in the back row beside her court-appointed guardian, arms crossed, eyes rimmed red but dry. Jared, once hunched and defeated in earlier hearings, now sat upright, composed, quietly watching it all unfold. Then came the CPS representative. Turned out, the anonymous tip Leah made to get Jared investigated, claiming he hit their youngest, was traced to a call made from a burner phone. That burner phone had been purchased with Leah's credit card at a gas station 6 blocks from her gym. Surveillance footage showed her at the kiosk, face clearly visible. The report concluded, no evidence of abuse by Mr. Morton. Evidence of manufactured allegations by Ms. Morton. At that point, the judge did something I hadn't seen in years. She called for a recess. Not because anyone requested one, but because she needed one. When we reconvened 20 minutes later, she was composed but cold. Her voice lost its usual measured tone. This court is appalled, she said. Appalled not only by the lengths to which Ms. Morton went to influence these proceedings, but by the sustained emotional harm inflicted upon her children. This is not strategy. This is abuse, and the court will treat it as such. Leah still said nothing. The ruling came fast. Full custody to Jared. Supervised visitation for Leah, pending psychiatric evaluation. Immediate referral to the district attorney's office for perjury and fraud. And In an unusual move, the judge barred Leah from initiating any further civil motions related to the divorce until all investigations were complete. She called it a necessary freeze to prevent further manipulation of judicial resources. After the hearing, I saw Leah in the parking lot. She was alone, pacing, phone pressed to her ear. She looked stunned, like she'd just woken up in the middle of a wreck she couldn't remember causing. Maybe for the first time, she realized the courtroom wasn't another stage, and her kids weren't props. But the real blow hadn't landed yet. 3 weeks later, Leah was arrested. 2 counts of perjury, 1 of obstruction, and a possible 4th charge related to falsified financial affidavits. Apparently, she'd also been hiding money, transferring small amounts to a crypto wallet under her maiden name, hoping no one would trace it. But Jared's new forensic accountant found it all. The story made the local papers. Not front page, but close enough. Mother faces charges after courtroom fraud in custody battle. Comments were vicious. Some painted her as a narcissist, others as mentally ill. A few tried to defend her, until more details came out. But what stuck with me the most wasn't the legal fallout. It was something Ava said months later when I bumped into Jared and the kids at a cafe. She didn't recognize me right away, but when Jared said my name, she froze. Then she said, "Do you still talk to my mom?" I said no. Ava nodded, then said, "She used to make me practice crying. In front of a mirror. Said real tears get custody." And then she went back to her muffin, like she hadn't just said something soul-crushingly tragic. That's the thing about karma. It doesn't always hit in the courtroom. Sometimes it waits, it watches, and then it strikes, not at the money or the house or the case, but at the image someone built of themselves, the perfect story they told to everyone else. And it tears it apart one horrifying truth at a time. Leah walked into court the next day without legal representation. Her usual calm confidence had cracked slightly, though she tried to hold on to the illusion. She wore a black blazer too sharp for the occasion, as if she were still trying to dress her way into credibility. But nobody in that courtroom was fooled any. Not the judge, not the opposing counsel, and definitely not her daughter sitting silently behind her with a guardian ad litem. Frank presented the digital forensics report like a slow, painful dissection. Every altered email, every changed timestamp, every forged attachment was laid bare. The court saw proof that Leah had not only edited digital communications, but had deliberately constructed an entire timeline of abuse, painting Jared as an absentee, even a danger. The metadata revealed she'd modified files late at night, patterns that matched up with her VPN logs. One email, originally sent at 8:12 a.m., had been backdated to appear as if it had been ignored for days. Jared had responded to it within minutes. The judge's eyes never left Leah during that testimony. When asked for a response, Leah did not deny it. She didn't admit it either. She simply said, "You do what you have to do to protect your children." But her words felt empty, especially with Ava in the room. 12 years old, eyes locked on the floor. Then came the next witness, a counselor Leah had taken her kids to see under court order. She testified that Leah had attempted to influence her findings by sharing medical notes about Jared's mental health, notes that had no verifiable source. The counselor eventually realized the notes were plagiarized from an online article about narcissistic abuse, word for word. When confronted, Leah had blamed it on a misunderstanding. That moment confirmed what many of us suspected. Leah wasn't just manipulating the system. She was rewriting reality to suit her narrative. The final blow came from Ava. She took the stand in a private session, but allowed the transcript to be read aloud in court. It was brutal. Ava admitted that her mother had coached her for weeks before therapy sessions, making her rehearse phrases like, "I feel unsafe with Daddy," and "He yells a lot at night." Ava said, "I didn't know what was true anymore. I just wanted her to stop getting mad at me." The courtroom was still. Not even Frank looked triumphant. This wasn't a win. This was a tragedy laid bare. The judge paused before ruling. Her voice was firm, controlled, but shook with something underneath, disgust maybe, or sorrow. She awarded Jared full legal and physical custody. Leah was granted supervised visits, contingent upon completion of a psychiatric evaluation and follow-up counseling. All financial decisions were frozen, pending investigation. And then the judge did something rare. She ordered Leah's case file referred to the district attorney's office for criminal review. Perjury, evidence tampering, filing false reports to CPS. The list went on. Leah didn't cry. She stood, nodded once, and walked out of the courtroom as if she still had somewhere important to be. But the story didn't end there. A month later, she was arrested. Someone leaked the news to the local press. Mother accused of manipulating custody case through fraud. Her mugshot made the rounds online. Parents in her neighborhood whispered at school drop-off lines. The yoga studio removed her as a volunteer. The PTA revoked her access to their Facebook. But more than the social fallout was the emotional one. Ava cut off contact. Her therapist later reported that she struggled with guilt, like she betrayed her mom just by telling the truth. The two younger kids had trouble sleeping, often waking up from dreams where they were back in court, begging someone to listen. Jared tried to rebuild. He switched jobs to reduce his travel, moved closer to his sister, enrolled the kids in therapy and martial arts. He told me once, in passing, "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just trying to teach them what love without conditions looks like." But what stuck with me the most was a moment months later when I saw Ava again. Older, steadier. She asked me, "Do you think people like my mom know they're lying? Or do they believe it while they do it?" I didn't know what to say. I still don't. Sometimes people try to outsmart the system. They manipulate courts, lie to experts, weaponize children. They build cases on deception so elaborate it almost becomes its own reality. But karma doesn't always come in a thunderclap. Sometimes it comes in a quiet courtroom, through a little girl's shaking voice, or a forensic report no one expected. It comes not because someone got caught, but because the truth refused to stay buried. And when it finally rises, it doesn't care how well you rehearsed your performance. It just burns everything false to the ground. After the arrest, Leah posted bail within 48 hours. She still had connections. An old college friend in corporate law who helped her post bond anonymously. But her return to society wasn't triumphant. She was met with silence. No one welcomed her back. Her neighborhood was cold. Parents avoided eye contact. Even her hairdresser canceled future appointments. The illusion of control she'd so carefully constructed was gone, replaced by something raw and hollow. The trial date for the criminal charges was set 6 months out, and during that time, she tried to reinvent herself. She started a blog under a fake name, posting essays about family court injustice and motherhood silenced. But it didn't take long for someone to connect the dots. One post contained a phrase lifted straight from her custody hearing, something she'd told Ava to say. It went viral in all the wrong ways. Former friends shared it on Facebook with comments like, "How dare she pretend to be the victim?" Or, "She's still lying, just online now." Meanwhile, Jared focused on recovery. He got the kids into a new school, far enough away that the gossip hadn't followed them. They adjusted slowly. Max, the youngest, stopped wetting the bed after 3 months. The middle child began drawing again. Monsters mostly. But the therapist said it was progress. Ava stayed quiet. She journaled a lot. In therapy, she said things like, "I feel like I was her puppet," and "She only loved me when I hated Dad." She never asked to see Leah, never asked about her trial, just kept moving forward like someone trying to outwalk a shadow. The pre-trial hearing was brutal. Leah's new defense attorney tried to get the evidence tossed, claimed the email forensics were flawed, the audio illegally obtained, the CPS report biased by paternal influence, but none of it held. The prosecution was meticulous. They had subpoenas, timestamps, expert witnesses lined up. And they had Ava's testimony, which, despite her age, was admissible under the state's child welfare exception. Leah pled not guilty on all charges. But the courtroom wasn't fooled. Even her attorney looked resigned by the end of the day. He made one last request: to allow Leah supervised contact with her children while the trial proceeded. The judge didn't even consider it. "These children need healing, not confusion," she said. Motion denied. The trial began on a cold Tuesday in January. I didn't attend every day, but I followed it closely. Headlines were everywhere. Mom accused of coaching child to fabricate abuse. Divorce case unravels into criminal nightmare. Former clients of mine called just to talk about it, like it was some kind of courtroom urban legend. And in a way, it was. A woman so intelligent, so composed, who thought she could outplay an entire system, and instead found herself devoured by it. Ava never testified in person. Her previous statements, along with therapy records and session transcripts, were submitted instead. But she wrote a letter. The prosecutor read it aloud on the last day. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even bitter. It was clinical. "I don't know if my mom knows she lied," Ava had written. Maybe she thought it was real because she needed it to be. But she hurt us, all of us. And I think she needs to stop pretending she didn't. Leah sat stone-faced through the reading, as she had through the entire trial. But when the verdict came, guilty on 3 counts, perjury, obstruction, and filing false claims, she blinked, just once. Then she closed her eyes like someone who had rehearsed a different ending and was struggling to adjust to the rewrite. The judge sentenced her to 4 years, with the possibility of parole after 2. Not a long sentence, but enough time to be forgotten. Enough time for her kids to grow, to breathe, to learn how to live without being watched, scripted, manipulated. After the sentencing, Jared made a statement to the press. He didn't gloat. He didn't blame. He said, "I never wanted her punished. I wanted our kids safe. And now, finally, they are." That was the end of it. Or at least, the end of the part the world could see. Behind closed doors, there was still healing. Still long nights. Still therapy sessions and questions and moments of silence at the dinner table when someone said "Mom" by accident. But there was also laughter again. And safety. And the quiet comfort of knowing that the truth, no matter how long it takes, doesn't just fight back, it endures. Leah's time in prison didn't make headlines after the sentencing. The news cycle moved on. And for most people, her story became just another cautionary tale. One more line in a thread about custody battles gone wrong. But for those closest to it, the aftermath rippled in ways no one could fully predict. Inside, Leah kept to herself. She wasn't violent, wasn't loud, but she didn't blend in either. Other inmates quickly picked up on her coldness. The same eerie calm that once impressed lawyers and judges now made her a target. She got into arguments early on. Not fights, just tense, quiet clashes with women who said she walked around like she was better than everyone else. She lost her commissary privileges twice for mouthing off to guards. One counselor described her as non-compliant, but not dangerous. She refused therapy at first, then demanded a different therapist because she didn't like her tone. Nothing changed. Nothing grew. Back on the outside, Ava turned 13. She didn't want a party, Jared offered gently, but she said no. She asked for one thing, to see her old baby videos. He hesitated. Those videos had Leah's voice in them, sometimes even her face. But Ava insisted. So they sat together on a Saturday afternoon and watched a 6-year-old version of her laugh in a backyard pool while Leah cheered behind the camera. Ava didn't cry. She didn't smile either. When the clip ended, she simply said, "I miss that version of her. The one before everything broke." Jared didn't know what to say. He just put a hand on her shoulder and left the room quietly when she asked for space. The middle child, Jonah, grew angrier. He struggled in school, especially with teachers who raised their voices. He got into a fight with another boy who joked that his mom must have been crazy. The school called Jared in. Jared didn't yell. He sat with Jonah, eye to eye, and asked him if he ever wanted to write a letter to his mom. Not to send, just to write. Jonah said nothing. But later that night, Jared found a crumpled piece of paper in the trash with the words, "You ruined everything, and still said you loved us." It was in Jonah's handwriting, scrawled in pencil, nearly torn in half. Leah tried to contact them once, around the 1-year mark of her sentence. She sent a letter addressed to Jared but meant for the kids. It was handwritten, 5 pages long. She claimed the trial had been biased, that the system had chewed her up, that everything she'd done had been for them. She never once apologized. Not sincerely, not directly. She used phrases like, "I'm sorry if you felt hurt," and "It was never my intention to cause pain." Jared read it twice, alone. Then he shredded it. He didn't tell the kids. Some might say that wasn't his call. But he knew what that kind of message could do. They were just beginning to sleep through the night without nightmares. He wasn't going to hand them a loaded memory. Ava began volunteering at the animal shelter during the summers. It was her idea. She said animals didn't ask questions. They just trusted you if you showed up. She got attached to a nervous beagle named Pepper, who flinched every time someone raised a hand too fast. "She acts brave," Ava told the staff, "but she's scared all the time." The irony didn't go unnoticed. Neither did the fact that Ava kept slipping pieces of her lunch into Pepper's cage, even when told not to. One day, during a court-mandated review hearing, Leah's attorney petitioned for early parole. He argued that she had taken anger management courses, had a clean record in prison, and showed strong signs of emotional rehabilitation. The prosecutor pushed back, citing a lack of remorse and psychological evaluations that still showed traits of manipulation. The judge agreed with the prosecution. Parole denied. Leah stared blankly as the decision was read. No outburst, no plea, just a hollow nod, like she hadn't really believed she'd be freed anyway. Word reached Jared through official channels. He didn't tell the kids right away. He waited until the weekend, made pancakes, waited until everyone had eaten. Then he told them simply, gently, that their mother had asked to come home and that the court had said no. There was a long silence at the table. Max, now 8, said, "Will she ever stop trying?" No one had an answer. But in that silence, something shifted. Not relief, not joy, but closure. Slow, gradual, and incomplete. Like a wound that still itches long after it heals. Ava later said to her therapist, It's not that I hate her, it's that I don't believe her anymore. And I don't think she believes herself either. That, in a way, was the saddest part of it all. Leah hadn't just lost her family, she'd lost the script. The one she thought she was writing. The one where she was the hero, the mother, the wronged wife, the savior. Now all that was left was the truth. And it didn't need her permission to exist. In her third year behind bars, Leah's behavior changed. Not in the way the prison psychologist had hoped. There was no breakthrough, no tearful moment of accountability, but she became quieter, more calculating in her silence. She stopped writing letters. She stopped trying to appeal. She didn't seek parole again. Instead, she seemed to retreat into herself, like she was preserving the last piece of a story she no longer had the energy to defend. Her cellmate once told a guard, "She talks in her sleep, says her daughter's name, over and over, like she's apologizing but not out loud." Outside, the world continued without her. Ava entered high school and started going by her middle name, Grace. She said she didn't want teachers or classmates Googling her mother's name and finding the articles. She joined the debate team. She didn't say much at first, just listened, took notes. But then, one day during a mock trial, she stood up and gave a closing argument so sharp and controlled that the room fell into stunned silence. Her coach asked her afterward where she'd learned to speak like that. She just shrugged and said, "I watched a lot of court." Jonah found solace in music. Drums, mostly. Loud, chaotic, expressive. His therapist called it kinetic therapy. He didn't want to talk, not really. But he'd bang on those drums until his arms shook. Jared built a small soundproof space in the garage and let him have at it. Sometimes he'd listen through the door, hearing the rhythm rise and fall, like a storm barely contained by walls. Max, youngest and most fragile, began asking deeper questions, not about what happened, but about who Leah was before it all. He once asked Jared, "Was she always like that, or did something break her?" Jared didn't have an answer. Some nights, Max would sit at the kitchen table with a photo of Leah, the one from their wedding, and just stare at it. He never cried, but he looked at it like he was searching for clues in her smile. The years passed slowly for Leah, faster for everyone else. When she was finally released, she didn't notify anyone. She moved into a halfway house 2 towns over and registered for a community library card the next day. No fanfare, no announcement. She walked through grocery stores like a ghost, always looking over her shoulder. She tried to get a job but found that her record followed her even where her name didn't. Employers Googled. Neighbors whispered. She started telling people she was divorced, childless, moved here for a fresh start. No one pressed. One afternoon, Leah went to a bookstore and found a novel on the staff-recommended shelf. Something Ava had once loved as a kid. She picked it up, flipped through the first chapter, then set it back down as if it had burned her. She stood frozen in that aisle for 5 minutes before walking out without a word. Meanwhile, Ava, still Grace to most, was applying for colleges. She wrote her admissions essay on the theme of trust. Not trauma, not victimhood, just trust. She began it with a single sentence. It takes years to build and seconds to destroy, but the absence of it teaches you who you are. She didn't mention Leah by name. She didn't need to. The weight was between the lines. Jonah formed a band with 2 other kids from school. They weren't good yet, but they played in garages and basements, and once, during a school assembly, he played a drum solo so long and intense that the principal had to step in and cut the mic. He smiled the whole time. It was the first time Jared had seen him smile without forcing it. Max began drawing again, but this time it wasn't monsters. It was people, always in pairs. A dad and a kid fishing. A teacher reading to a class. A child hugging a dog. Always connection. Always safety. Jared never spoke about Leah unless the kids brought her up first. Even then, he kept it simple. Honest. Not cruel. He said, "Your mom made choices. Some will never understand. But you don't have to carry them." They didn't speak of forgiveness. Not because they couldn't. But because they didn't need to. The goal was never to erase what happened. It was to move beyond the gravity of it. Leah, alone now, spent her days in silence. She watched other people's lives unfold from benches in public parks, from the corner seat at diners. She had no real friends, no contact with her children. Her name wasn't blocked, but it was never used. She became, in every way that mattered, a figure in the rearview mirror, and maybe that was the real end. Not a courtroom victory, not a prison sentence, but time. Slow, steady, merciless time. Erasing the relevance of someone who once tried to make the world spin on lies. Because in the end, even the best constructed story means nothing if no one's left to believe it. On a gray afternoon in early spring, Leah walked past her old neighborhood. Not close enough to be noticed, but near enough to see the house. Her house. It looked different now. The shutters were painted a soft green, the driveway freshly paved. There were children's chalk drawings scattered across the sidewalk. Stars, hopscotch grids, a giant smiley face. She stared for a long time, wondering if any of the marks were made by her own children. Probably not. They wouldn't have remembered her well enough to recreate anything. She didn't knock. She didn't even step onto the property. She just stood across the street in a long coat, blending into the background like a stranger trying to remember the script of a life she no longer had a role in. Inside that very house, Max was helping Jared cook dinner. He was taller now, more confident. He cracked jokes while stirring pasta, the kind of everyday humor that kids use when they feel safe. Jared watched him, recognizing the ease in his shoulders that hadn't been there a few years ago. That kind of ease took work. Not just therapy and time, but consistency, patience, presence. When Ava came downstairs, still Grace to the outside world, she gave Max a playful shove and grabbed a spoon to help. Jonah was upstairs, headphones on, working on a track with his bandmates. The house wasn't perfect. Sometimes voices still rose, doors still closed a little too hard, and silence still hovered when someone said "Mom" by accident. But it was real, and it was healing. Leah didn't stay long. She turned around after a few minutes and walked back to the bus stop. No one saw her. No one needed to. She sat alone on the ride home, staring out the window, her reflection barely visible in the smudged glass. Somewhere in her coat pocket was a letter she'd written weeks ago. It was addressed to Ava, but the envelope remained unsealed. She'd rewritten it 6 times. Sometimes it was apologetic, other times defensive. In one version, she blamed the system. In another, she blamed Jared. None of them sounded honest, so she never sent it. At the halfway house, Leah kept mostly to herself. She attended mandatory check-ins, folded laundry for a local dry cleaner, and ate dinner in silence. Occasionally, new women arrived and asked what she was in for. She'd say, "custody fraud," then laugh like it was a joke. It never landed. Eventually, people stopped asking. She became one of those cautionary figures. Polite, distant, wrapped in a shell no one dared tap on. She once tried to volunteer at a local community center but was turned away after a background check. It didn't surprise her. She just nodded, thanked them, and never tried again. Back at school, Grace was preparing for graduation. She had applied early decision to a university 3 states away and been accepted. Her personal essay, which she had revised a dozen times, didn't mention her mother, not directly. But the admissions counselor later said it was one of the most emotionally mature submissions they'd read that year. Grace never bragged about it. She simply printed the acceptance letter, folded it neatly, and placed it in a folder under her bed. That night, she sat on her roof alone, staring up at the stars, breathing the kind of breath that only comes after carrying something heavy for too long. Jared had mixed feelings about her leaving. He wanted her to fly. He also wanted to protect her forever. He told her, "You don't owe anyone anything, especially not the past. But if you ever want to talk about it, I'll listen." Grace hugged him and said, "You listened when no one else did." That was enough. Jonah offered to help her pack, and Max insisted she take his favorite hoodie for dorm nights. It was oversized and ridiculous, but she took it anyway. Leah never learned about the acceptance letter, or the hoodie, or the roof. She lived only in the echo of what had been and the cold shell of what remained. She visited the library once a week, checked out books she rarely finished, and sometimes watched old courtroom dramas on public television. One day, during a rerun, she saw a line that stuck with her. "The worst lies are the ones we tell ourselves so we can keep being the victim." She turned off the TV. That night, she finally tore up the letter to Ava. Not out of rage, not even grief, but because for the first time, she realized it had never been for her daughter. It had always been for herself, and that wasn't enough anymore. Grace's move to college came quietly. No dramatic goodbyes, no tears at the airport. Jared rented a van, packed her things with quiet care, and drove her across 2 states to the brick campus town where she'd begin again. Jonah rode up front, earbuds in, while Max dozed off in the back, his head resting on a duffel bag full of snacks and books. Grace looked out the window most of the ride, headphones in but nothing playing. Just silence. Just space. When they arrived, she didn't ask for help setting up her dorm. She'd already organized everything down to drawer labels and shoe racks. Jared understood. She wasn't being distant. She was building control in a place where she'd been stripped of it for too long. As they left her room, Max gave her a tight hug and whispered, "You don't have to come back unless you want to." She nodded without speaking. Jonah gave her a fist bump. Jared stood there for a second too long and finally said, "It's okay if you miss home. It's okay if you don't. Back in the car, the drive home felt longer than the drive there. Jared turned the radio down low, but the silence was thick. After an hour, Jonah said, "She's going to be okay, right?" Jared didn't answer immediately. Then finally, he said, "She already is." Grace settled into college life faster than anyone expected. Her roommate, a girl from Portland named Sienna, was warm and loud and obsessed with coffee. She never asked about Grace's past. She just invited her along to everything, from night study groups to late diner runs. And slowly, Grace began to say yes. She joined a student-led support group, not as a participant at first, just to listen. But one night, someone shared a story about parental estrangement, and when the room was quiet, Grace found herself speaking. Not about Leah directly, but about the feeling of being raised by someone who loved control more than connection. No one interrupted. No one asked for details. And for the first time, Grace felt what it was like to speak and not brace for backlash. Meanwhile, Leah's world grew smaller. She'd moved out of the halfway house into a tiny apartment subsidized by a local reentry program. It was one room with a twin bed and a stained stove that barely worked. She tried to get work but found nothing stable. She cleaned buildings overnight and took occasional surveys online for grocery cards. Sometimes she passed by playgrounds just to hear children laugh. Not to watch, not to linger, just to listen. But even that became a reminder of what she had lost. She often thought about writing again. Not to her children, not anymore. But maybe a memoir, something to shape the chaos into meaning. But every time she tried, she hit the same wall. She didn't know how to tell the truth without making herself the hero. Jonah began submitting his music online. One of his tracks got picked up by a small indie label that released high school demos. It wasn't fame, not even close, but it was something. His counselor said it gave him a channel, and that's all he needed for now. He started to talk more. About school, about friends, sometimes even about the years they didn't mention. Not deeply. Just moments. Remember when Max drew monsters? Or, I used to think I could hear Mom's voice at night, even when she wasn't home. Little shards of the past, pulled into the light and set down without weight. Max became obsessed with science. Space, mostly. Black holes, light speed, gravity wells. He'd explain things no one asked about, with wide eyes and flailing hands. One night, after a school event, he asked Jared if people could ever fall so deep into something, like a black hole, that they could never come out. Jared said, "Sometimes, but there's always something called escape velocity." Max nodded and said, "I hope Mom finds hers someday." Leah turned 50 and didn't tell anyone. She spent the day alone, eating cold cereal and watching a nature documentary about wolves. Something about the way they care for the pack, how they grieve, how they exile, struck her hard. That night, she dreamed she was in a courtroom again, but this time no one was there. No judge, no jury, no Jared, no children. Just her, reading aloud to no one. The following morning, she packed up a small box of papers, notes, and the one photo she still kept, a faded picture of Ava in kindergarten, smiling through a missing front tooth. She walked to the park, sat on a bench, and began tearing the papers into strips. She didn't cry, just worked through them like a ritual, a quiet unbuilding. When she finished, she let the wind take them. Tiny fragments of a story she finally admitted couldn't be rewritten. Not this way. And somewhere, in a campus library hundreds of miles away, Grace stood between two shelves, pulled down a thick book on restorative justice, and underlined a sentence in bright blue ink. Healing is not about returning to what was, but building something from what remains. She didn't know why that line hit her so hard, only that it did. A year passed. Grace visited home for Thanksgiving. Not long, just a few days, but enough to sit at the kitchen table, to hear Max ramble about galaxies, to tease Jonah about his terrible taste in band posters. Jared made her favorite pie. No one talked about Leah. They didn't need to. Her absence had become its own quiet presence, always there but never addressed, like a missing photograph on the wall. On her last night, Grace slipped outside alone, wrapped in Jonah's old hoodie, and sat on the porch swing. The autumn air was sharp, leaves scratching along the sidewalk. She looked up at the stars, so small from this part of the world, and whispered something no one would hear. Maybe it was goodbye. Maybe it was nothing. Leah never reached out again. Not for birthdays. Not for holidays. At some point, she must have understood there would be no answer. No reunion scene. No moment of absolution where the children she'd hurt would smile and say it was okay. She took a night shift job cleaning classrooms after hours, wore a name badge no one read, and went home to silence. She kept her head down, kept her voice quiet, and spoke to no one about what had once been. There was no dramatic collapse, Just the slow fading of someone who had once controlled the script and now lived without lines. Grace graduated early, magna cum laude. At the ceremony, Jared stood in the front row, beaming. Jonah cheered too loudly. Max made a terrible banner out of printer paper and duct tape. She wore a silver pendant under her gown, a small compass Jared had given her. On the back, he'd had it engraved, "You are your own true north." That night, in her dorm, she sat at her desk and began writing. Not a letter, not a diary. Just a document called Truth. No preamble. No drama. Just pieces of a life reclaimed from the wreckage. Leah died quietly 5 years later. A heart condition no one knew about. No obituary. No service. No forwarding address. The landlord boxed up her things. There wasn't much. A coat. A library card. A half-used notebook with a single page that read, "I thought I was saving them. I was saving myself from being alone." It was never sent to anyone. It never would be. Somewhere, Grace sat in a coffee shop, older now, steady. She opened her laptop and clicked on the document labeled Truth. She hadn't touched it in years. But today, something made her scroll, made her breathe through the memories, the silence, the lines she'd once written with trembling fingers. She smiled, not because it was over, but because it had never defined her. It was just the prologue, and she was still writing the rest.